Now in our 25th year, a quarter of a century of service to the worldwide amateur radio community, we are this week in Amateur Radio. Your all-amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. This is edition number 1332 with a release and air date of Saturday, September 7th, 2024. Please take the program to your air following the cue tone. On the air and on the internet since 1993, serving the amateur radio community with weekly, reliable, amateur radio news and special features, we are this week in Amateur Radio. The premier worldwide amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1332 of This Week in Amateur Radio. Hams respond as Hawaii is threatened by 3 major storms. The FCC grants drone operators spectrum access for navigation. Be careful if you have one of these on your bicycle. Word has it that Shimano wireless derailleurs are subject to hacking. The Los Angeles Transit Agency fears a loss of revenue if the FCC approves the proposed changes to the 900 MHz band. The Utah section is expanding its emergency communications capabilities to include mesh networks. The Starliner spacecraft, docked to the ISS, is emitting strange noises. September is National Preparedness Month. The ARRL says to consider building a Go kit. The Amateur Radio Emergency Service is now including the Incident Command System protocols in its training. The League issues an update to its volunteer examiner services in a new update. The International Telecommunications Union signs its new 2,000-plus page global treaty updating radio spectrum use worldwide. What happens to your stuff when you become a silent key? The League has a new video. The FCC and Canada sign a new Memorandum of Understanding. And researchers at MIT have developed a faster, more energy-efficient transistor. We will tell you all about it in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment, along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Ono Benchop, VK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio finds Ono implementing the KISS, or Keep It Simple Stupid, principle to amateur radio. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This week, Will takes us back to see how the vacuum tube revolutionized radio, changing it more than any other single invention. This week we take a close-up look at the invention of the Audion. And we will stop by and visit with Bill Salyers, AJ8B in the DX Corner, with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio in the suburbs of Albany, New York, where summer is doing its best to hang on, although there is a little color appearing on the trees, this is W2XBS.
And reporting this week from our news bureau in Cortlandville, New York, I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
And reporting from our news bureau in Salem, Ohio, this is Denny Haight, NZ8D.
And reporting from our news bureau in Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, I'm Dave Wilson, WA2HOY.
And reporting from our news bureau in Knoxville, Tennessee, where we're getting ready for the Tennessee QSO party this weekend, I'm Josh Marler, AA4WX.
And reporting from our news bureau in Western Mass, where the leaves are getting ready to show off like it's a New England fashion show, and the pumpkin spice is creeping back into everything, I'm Marvin Turner, W0MET.
And recording from our news basement here in Scotia, New York, I'm Savo, K2SAV.
And reporting from our amateur radio outpost in the western Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where the autumn leaves are just beginning to turn color now, maybe 1% color. I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
And reporting from our news bureau in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where signs of autumn are beginning to be seen, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR.
And now with our lead story, here is Chris Perrine, KB2 FAF.
Leading off the news this week, in late August, Hawaii's Big Island was threatened by 3 major tropical storms, and amateur radio operators were prepared to assist as the threat grew more intense. Russell Roberts, KH6JRM, Public Information Officer for Hawaii County and ARRL Pacific Section, said that beginning August 23rd, storm watches and warnings were being issued for tropical storms Hone, Gilma, and Hector, all churning off the island's southern coast. By August 31st and September 1st, Hone had become a Category 1 hurricane with winds over 75 miles per hour, occasionally gusting to 100 miles per hour, and heavy rain. Gilma was next as a Category 1, but later intensified to a Category 3 hurricane, dropping 28 inches of rain, which flooded roads along with high winds that brought down trees, power, and communication lines. We had 3 amateur radio emergency service operators on the net for about 24 hours beginning August 30th, and they handled 41 contacts, said Roberts. Some repeaters were out of fuel, so we switched to HF to pass traffic and assess the damage. The storms never made landfall, and while there were no fatalities or injuries, the damage was severe. Nearly 30,000 residents were affected. Power is still out for over 200 customers. Cleanup and road repairs are active. We are very fortunate, said Roberts. There was concern a fire warning would need to be issued for several parts of the island, but the approaching weather brought rain and lowered the temperature.
The Federal Communications Commission issued new rules this week that would allow unmanned aerial vehicles, also known as drones, to use a portion of the 5 GHz spectrum band to enhance their wireless connectivity. The agency said its order establishes initial service rules that allow operators to obtain direct frequency assignments in a portion of the 5030 to 5091 MHz band for non-networked operations. The FCC first proposed rules in January 2023 to provide drones with enhanced spectrum access. The agency requested public input at the time on the types of safety measures needed to help unmanned aerial vehicles effectively share band access. The agency's order, released last week, said it is initially limiting drone access to the central part of the 5 GHz spectrum to address concerns regarding the impact of these aeronautical operations on adjacent services. The new regulations also established an interim access mechanism to allow drone operators to submit requests for spectrum access to the Federal Aviation Administration. Once approved by the FAA, operators would then be required to complete a registration form with the FCC. The interim mechanism will be made available to operators after the rules become effective, and the Commission has announced by public notice that it will begin accepting registrations, the agency said. The new rules noted that the actions are initial steps and that future actions may be needed to provide drone operators with enhanced wireless flexibility. FCC Chair Jessica Rosenworcel said in a statement that the agency will continue to work with public and private sector partners to support the best outcomes for public safety, wireless services, consumers, and our economy. We are already starting to live in the future we've long imagined. Uncrewed aircraft systems are fighting wildfires, supporting news gathering, delivering packages, and supporting national security, she said. The FCC is working hard to meet the spectrum needs of remote-piloted aircraft activity. The Biden administration's National Spectrum Strategy, released in November 2023, noted that the FCC was moving to enhance drone access in the 5030 to 5091 MHz band as a starting point. Thereafter, this 61 MHz portion of spectrum will be studied so that the FCC can optimize unmanned aerial vehicle spectrum access across the band, while avoiding harmful interference to other protected in-band and adjacent band operations, the strategy said.
Now celebrating our 25th year keeping the amateur radio community around the world informed, you are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available worldwide as a podcast from our web at twiar.net.
The International Telecommunication Union released this week an updated version of the radio regulations, the international treaty governing the global use of radio frequency spectrum and satellite orbits. Entering into force on January 1, 2025, the 2024 edition of the ITU radio regulations is the result of a 4-year process that culminated in 4 weeks of negotiations during the World Radio Communication Conference 23 hosted last year in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. The ITU radio regulations govern the global use of radio frequency spectrum in satellite orbits for all radio services, systems, and applications, including fixed and mobile broadband, satellite systems, sound and TV broadcasting, radio navigation, meteorological monitoring and prediction, space research and Earth exploration, amateur radio services, and other topics. The 2024 edition of the Radio Regulations marks a significant milestone in the world of technology, said ITU Secretary General Doreen Bogdan-Martin. As technological progress advances and the demand for spectrum grows, the international treaty continues to evolve to accommodate new radio communication services and applications, minimize interference between services, and ensure equitable access to this essential resource. Treaty provisions also direct how radio equipment and systems must operate to ensure efficient and effective coexistence among various services worldwide and anywhere in space, optimizing the usage of today's increasingly crowded airwaves. The 2024 Radio Regulations identifies new spectrum resources to support technological innovation, deepen global connectivity, increase access to and equitable use of space-based radio resources, and enhance safety at sea, in the air, and on land. The updated radio regulations are the result of hard-won agreements reached at WRC 23 and a testament to the unwavering spirit of cooperation and compromise among all of our members to negotiate timely changes to the international treaty, said Mario Manowitz, director of the ITU Radio Communication Bureau. The updated treaty provides a framework for national spectrum management that aligns with international standards and guarantees the stable, predictable regulatory environment that is essential for the development of innovative radio communication services for all. Global regulation of the radio spectrum began with the signing of the first International Radio Telegraph Convention in Berlin on November 3, 1906, after 30 states came together and agreed on key maritime communications and safety provisions and established SOS as a globally recognized distress signal. Since then, the radio regulations have evolved into a 4-volume treaty of more than 2,000 pages. The treaty establishes the rights and obligations of ITU's 193 member states and now covers more than 40 different radio communication services, spanning frequencies from 8.3 kHz to 3,000 GHz. The 2024 radio regulations are available in all 6 UN official languages, with electronic versions that can be downloaded free of charge. Print and DVD versions will be available for purchase in the coming weeks.
Los Angeles County's Transportation Agency joined hundreds of amateur radio operators in asking the Federal Communications Commission to deny a proposal to reconfigure the lower 900 megahertz band. The L.A. County Metropolitan Transportation Authority is worried that in-car transponders used for its toll lanes would see interference. The agency wrote to the FCC on August 30. The toll program processes 110 million transactions annually and has more than 850,000 active transponders. If all existing licensed and unlicensed users of the lower 900 megahertz frequencies are compressed into a significantly reduced portion of the spectrum, Metro will face potentially significant difficulties in identifying frequencies that can be used for its transponders without being subject to interference moving forward, wrote Mark Linsenmeyer, the head of the county's toll lane program. He argued that interference would contribute to missed transponder reads, degraded customer experiences, and lost toll revenue. Currently, the 902 to 928 megahertz band is occupied primarily by federal radio location systems and some medical and scientific devices. Secondary to those are licensees providing location and monitoring services, and below LMS are amateur radio users. unlicensed wireless devices get last priority. An LMS community called Navstar, a geolocation company and one of the main LMS licensee holders, asked the FCC in April to alter its rules for the band to allow the company to operate a nationwide GPS supplement. NextNav's proposal would see the company swapping its current holdings in the band for a single nationwide license for 15 megahertz most of the band, 902 to 907 megahertz for uplink, and 918 to 928 for the downlink to support its geolocation network and 5G broadband. It would also involve higher power levels for NextNav and moving other users to the 907 to 918 block of the band. Hundreds of amateur radio operators have also written to the agency to oppose a rulemaking. They say the plan would make their devices and networks more prone to interference. NextNav wrote its petition that the GPS doesn't work well indoors or in urban canyons, and GPS signals are subject to jamming, spoofing, and other targeting events, and that its nationwide terrestrial network was the only viable option for bolstering GPS. Comments in the proceedings are due September 5th, and reply comments are due by September 20th.
Research was unveiled at the Usenix Workshop on Offensive Technologies by researchers from Northeastern University and UC San Diego. In their paper, researchers note that, much like modern cars, today's bicycles are cyber-physical systems that contain embedded computers and wireless links to enable new types of telemetry and control. One of the more common cyber-connected systems is the wireless gear shifter, which uses electronic switches instead of traditional control levers to allow bikers to shift gears. Researchers tested shifters sold by Shimano, a Japanese company that is one of the larger cycling parts sellers in the world. Unfortunately, these shifters are vulnerable to simple replay attacks of the sort that are frequently targeted at car fobs. Such attacks, which utilize radio signal manipulation, allow attackers to capture and weaponize data wirelessly exchanged by hardware parts. In this case, attackers could use such an attack to unexpectedly shift gears or to jam its shifters and lock the bike into the wrong gear. Radio hardware necessary to carry out such an attack is relatively inexpensive. In professional races, attackers could exploit these weaknesses to gain an unfair advantage, potentially causing crashes or injuries by manipulating gear shifts or jamming the shifting operation.
A new and faster way to communicate during emergencies is being planned by the Utah section of the ARRL Aries Group, which serves Salt Lake County, the most populous area in Utah. Here to tell us all about it is John Ross, KD8IDJ.
ARRL Utah Section Public Coordinator Scott Rosenbusch, K7HSR, said that discussion and planning for mesh networks using ARDEN, Amateur Radio Emergency Data Network technology, is on the drawing board. A recent meeting and presentation by Brett Pruitt, K7BDP, Utah Section Emergency Coordinator, was attended by a large group of ARES amateur radio operators. More than a dozen Salt Lake County hams have already invested in ARDEN technology, with an interest in helping to create and support an emergency mesh network in that county. Southern Utah ARES groups have already created a 5-county mesh network that can be used for emergency communications. We hope to ultimately connect to Starlink and run the mesh network over that, said Pruitt. On November 2nd, we will have an exercise with hospitals in the northern and southern Utah ARES groups using the regular internet. After that, if Starlink is more readily available, we will run the drill again without the internet to fully test the new technology. Pruitt said the goal is to have everything working by early 2025. The needs of participating agencies have evolved to require more than analog voice and low-speed data modes, said Rosenbusch. High-speed mesh networks using ARDEN software will allow amateur radio to play a larger part in supporting these agencies in emergencies. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
The Utah section is working to extend this technology, said Rosenbusch. Our hope is to bring this technology to other parts of the state to increase the communications capability and value of amateur radio to partner agencies.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
September is National Preparedness Month, and ARRL is working to help radio amateurs have a plan for family resilience. With more on how you and your family can be prepared, we go to League headquarters where John Ross, KD8IDJ, files this special report.
Many hams enjoy public service as part of their operating. Being ready to activate for a served agency through the ARRL Amateur Radio Emergency Service, ARES, involves not only being licensed and trained, but also prepared and equipped. ARRL Director Emergency Management Josh Johnson, KE5MHV, suggests that hams and their families have a go bag. He says there are a few things to consider. You need to be able to function while activated, so that means you need a kit for your needs and a kit for your radio needs. If your family is impacted by the situation, they also need to have some gear at the ready. On the ARRL website, there is an emergency prep kit checklist. It lists the common items such as food and water for several days, a first aid kit, medications, chargers for your devices, and other useful items. Having a kit for your radio is useful as well. Go kits will vary based on function and need for the field, said Johnston. Most kits should include a dual-band HT or mobile radio with an antenna, a power supply, and all necessary cables and connectors. Every kit should include a notepad or paper and some type of pens or pencils as well. You should have a power source and power cables. If you're working HF, then you will need an HF radio and antenna. And if you want digital capabilities, then a computer with software preloaded will be desired. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Other things you may want will include tape and tools, spare batteries, headphones, flashlights of some sort, cell phone chargers, and a multimeter. Other items that won't fit in a bag but may be needed include a generator, a working surface like a small folding table, a chair, and some type of shelter.
It is time once again for this month's Volunteer Monitoring Report. The Volunteer Monitor Program is a joint initiative between the ARRL and the FCC to enhance compliance in the amateur radio service. Here is this month's activity report of the Volunteer Monitoring Program. 2 licensees in Michigan and Wisconsin received advisory notices to stay off local repeaters, both having received stay-off directives from the repeater owners. The licensees were informed that further use of the repeaters would be considered deliberate interference and would be referred to the FCC for enforcement action. Technician class licensees in Pennsylvania and Michigan received advisory notices for FT8 operation on 40 meters. Technicians have only CW privileges on 40 meters. A good operator commendation was issued to a licensee in Virginia for exemplary operation as net control of a daily net meeting on 7.251 MHz. A volunteer monitor alert was issued on July 20th for a pulsing noise on 20 meters. The VM program administrator participated in a nationwide online presentation to ARRL section managers and participated in one FCC meeting. The totals for monitoring were 1,908 hours on HF frequencies and 2,801 hours on VHF frequencies and above, for a total of 4,709 hours. We thank Volunteer Monitor Program Administrator Riley Hollingsworth, K4ZDH, for this report.
Applications for the 2024 ARRL Club Grants Program are now being reviewed. The application period closed July 26, 2024. ARRL Field Services Manager Mike Walters, W8ZY, said 110 grant applications have been received and the awards will be announced in late November. Grants are available up to $25,000 and emphasis is given to projects that are transformative in nature, said Walters. Examples of projects include, but are not limited to, getting on the air projects, ham training, and skills development through mentoring, STEM and STEAM learning through amateur radio, station resources for use by the ham community, and emergency communications and public service projects that emphasize training. Since 2022, $500,000 has been distributed to amateur radio clubs, says Walters. With this year's awards, the total will increase to $1 million awarded. The ARRL Club Grants are administered by the ARRL Foundation.
August is National Make-A-Will Month. So, what happens to all your radio gear when you become a silent key? Here with a few details is John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Some estimates show that nearly 2/3 of Americans don't have a plan. For some, it's procrastination. Others don't know where to start. So many times we hear from the family of a silent key who are overwhelmed with what to do with a lifetime worth of amateur radio gear, said ARR Director of Development Kevin Beal, K8EAL. Simply thinking through what needs to be done ahead of time can prevent the stress on our loved ones after we are gone. ARRL this week held a webinar hosted by Beal and Dino Pappas, KL0S, to discuss the steps of planning. It is important that, unfortunately, doesn't get a lot of attention. The bottom line up front is what happens to all of our beloved ham gear when that inevitable day comes along when we become a silent key. Unfortunately, that day may arrive unexpectedly, so we need to prepare ahead of time and make it as simple as possible for our families, said Pappas. On the ARRL HQ YouTube channel, you can see a replay of the 52-minute presentation, along with the question and answer section at the end. Your station is an asset, just like anything else you built and put resources into. Deciding now what happens when you become a silent key can solidify your legacy to ham radio, said Beal. The ARRL Legacy Circle recognizes the generosity of individuals who have planned support for ARRL through wills, trust, life insurance gifts, and other ways. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
The ARRL Legacy Circle ensures that ARRL and amateur radio will continue to thrive for generations to come.
The Hawaiian Islands Grid Madness 2024, a VHF-UHF simplex event, will take place on Sunday, September 22 from 1300 to 1700 HST. The 4-hour event is designed for MCOM practice and for fun. Amateur radio operators will have a chance to test their equipment, coverage, and operating skills using FM simplex on 6 meters, 2 meters, 1.25 meters, and 70 centimeters. All licensed amateur radio operators in the state of Hawaii may participate. Complete rules and information are available at Grid Madness 2024 info packet. The Hawaiian Islands Grid Madness 2024 is sponsored by the Emergency Amateur Radio Club of Hawaii. Meanwhile, Pacificon, hosting the 2024 ARRL Pacific Division Convention, will be held on October 18 through the 20th at the San Ramon Marriott in San Ramon, California. The 3-day event, sponsored by the Mount Diablo Amateur Radio Club, features a full slate of forum presentations on a wide range of amateur radio topics. ARRL National Instructor Gordon West, WB6NOA, will be on hand. There will also be an opportunity to hear about and discuss important national amateur radio issues with ARRL officials and the staff. For more information, visit the Pacificon website at Pacificon 2024.
In case you missed our report last time, the ARRL has disclosed that it agreed to a $1 million ransom payment to the hackers who disrupted its computers and servers on May 15th, stealing data and taking many of its services down. Writing on its webpage, the League described the attack as an act of organized crime, characterizing the initial demand payout as exorbitant in exchange for access to decryption tools. The ARRL said that the final amount was agreed upon only after extensive negotiation and that the sum and the price tag for restoring the system is being covered by insurance. The ARRL said that although the hackers did not get any sensitive information from its members, it confirmed in July that the ransomware did access personal data of an estimated 150 employees who have since been provided with free identity protection services. In July, the ARRL board created its Information Technology Advisory Committee. Members are being drawn from the IT industry professionals as well as those on the League staff and board who have experience in the field.
ARRL New England Division Vice Director Phil Temples, K9HI, presented a signed official citation from Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey and Lieutenant Governor Kimberly Driscoll to mark the ARRL New England Division Convention's 100th anniversary. John Ross, KD8IDJ, is at League headquarters with this report.
The presentation made at the convention's August 27th Grand Banquet was among the special events highlighted at the Northeast Ham Exposition. And that citation reads, on behalf of the residents of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I'm pleased to confer upon you this governor's citation in recognition of the 100th anniversary of the American Radio Relay League's New England Division Convention held this year in Marlborough, and in deep gratitude to the approximately 13,000 amateur radio operators in the Commonwealth who dedicate their time, knowledge, and equipment to assist their communities. Northeast Ham Exposition Program Chair Skip Youngberg, K1NKR, reports the New England Division conventions have been held for 100 years, although there haven't been 100 years annual conventions. New England's first ARRL-sponsored division convention was held in Springfield, Massachusetts on March 28th and 29th in 1924. Division's conventions moved to Massachusetts in 1925, Providence, Rhode Island in 1926, Hartford, Connecticut in 1927, and Boston, Massachusetts in 1928. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
Throughout the 20s and 30s, Boston-based Massachusetts state conventions were typically held in combination with the Boston Ham Fest. Division, state, and section conventions filled the average ham's social calendar from the 1920s to the 1960s. Thanks to program chairperson Skip Youngberg, K1NKR, for contributing to this story.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available as an on-demand stream from Spotify, Deezer, and wherever podcasts are available.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. Often people will ask me if there is a written copy of the information that I present. There are so many call signs, dates, and URLs being discussed, you could never remember them until such time as you could write them down. I use most of the same data that you hear in the DX Corner for the weekly DX column in the Ohio Section Journal. If you just Google ARRL Ohio Section, you will find the Ohio Section website and you can subscribe to the weekly journal and get most of this information. The actual website is arrl-ohio.org. This is a free journal and you don't need to be an ARL member to receive it. You won't get the well-rounded information that you get from the This Week in Amateur Radio podcast, but you will get the majority of my DX information. So here's what's happening in the world of DX. This section of DX News comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, just drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com. The CY9C St. Paul Island operation is now QRT. By all accounts, the CY9C DXpedition to St. Paul Island ran smoothly. As of August 29th at 1904 UTC, they had recorded 50,000 QSOs with 14,000 unique calls. 16,000 were on CW, 3,300 on sideband, and 31,000 were on FT8. Missing CW contacts from earlier days have been accounted for. A full statistical summary is available on Clublog. CY9C is primarily used FT8 Super Fox mode and occasionally switched to FT8 Foxhound mode as conditions warranted, particularly on the low bands and for marginal band conditions. Donations to help offset the high cost of the 2 helicopters and the boat are welcome and most appreciated. So here's my latest update on this DXpedition. As of 1400 Zulu on Monday, September 1st, the CY9C team had a total of 81,637 contacts. Band conditions were much improved on Monday and the team took advantage of it with all 6 flex radios in operation. The team continued non-stop until Wednesday evening local time. 73s from Murray, team leader, WA4DAN. And I have to admit, I'm very appreciative because I dogged him for several nights on 160 and I finally got him the night before they went QRT. So I was very lucky to get him in the log on 160. So here's an update on KH-8T American Samoa, which is in fact QRV right now until September 16th. The team plans to give as many people as possible a chance to work an all-time new one or a new band or mode country. They will be QRV on 160 through 6 meter CW, sideband, and digital modes. Their band plan is shown on their website. Bill, W5SJ, is the KHT pilot. You can QSL via M0URX, preferably via OQRS, or direct with $3. 6 Oscar 3 Tango Somalia details have surfaced. The 6 Oscar 3 Tango team is finalizing details for their 5 stations, which will be QRV next month in northwestern Somalia. All antennas are pin ready, including a 7-element 6-meter Yagi. They plan to be on CW, sideband, and FT8. they have decided not to use SuperFox. Quote, having carefully weighed the pros and cons of using SuperFox mode, while recognizing that if developed, it could become a high standard, at the moment, we feel that it is still too young, they said, end quote. Team leader Fabry, IV3JPP, also emphasized that contrary to published reports, the precise dates for their trips are not yet decided. As widely reported in the media, Somalia is a dangerous place, especially in the capital of Mogadishu. So we really wish those guys the best of luck and stay safe. So get your calendars out and mark them for Charlie 8 Kilo, Mozambique, planned for January 2025. Planning is underway for a de-expedition to Mozambique in early 2025 with the call sign C8K. Czechoslovakian operators will man this de-expedition. This will be an all-band, all-mode operation on 160 through 6, including 60 meters, Joe, CW, sideband, RIDI, and digital modes. They will also be on the QO100, RS44, and IO117 satellites. If local internet is available, they do plan to use Clublog Live. We have an update on VK9CV, the Cocos Keelings Island de-expedition. They have announced that they will have 3 locations. VK9CV is planning for November 1st to the 11th. Realizing that conditions to the USA are very short, end quote, the VK9CV team has decided to use 3 QTHs so that they can simultaneously be on one band at the same time to cover CW sideband and the digital modes. These 3 locations will be about 700 meters apart, and they are hoping for, quote, as little QRM as possible. And I wish them luck, because that is one of the ones I need for an all-time new one. KAZU M0CFW, also known as JK3GAD, is heading back to 3 Baker 9 Rodriguez Island for both CQ Worldwide DX contest weekends. He will be there from October 22 to the 30th, and again from November 17th to the 27th. During the contest, he will use the call sign 3 Baker 9 kilowatt as a single operator, all-band, high-power entry. Outside the contest, he will sign 3 Baker 9 stroke M0CFW. His antennas will include a buddy hex for 20 through 10 meters, verticals with elevated radials for 40 meters and 80 meters, and an inverted L for 160. He cautions that he might not install the 160-meter antennas in time for the single sideband contest weekend, so we'll have to see. Per CX3ZAN, operators from the Uruguay DX group will have the Charlie 91 Baker Victor call sign from Mozambique, October 17th to the 24th. This will be a holiday-style de-expedition with a pair of 100-watt stations, one on 40 through 6 CW and the other on 40 through 6 sideband. So I'm looking forward to that one. E51 EME in the South Cook Islands is QRT on 10 and 6 meters through September 15th. This is grid BG08CW. Bob, ZL1RS, will use an ICOM IC705 to a homebrew kilowatt 6-meter amplifier into a pair of 5-element Yagis stacked on a new homebrew 11-meter tilt-over mask. Bob has been providing online updates. Joel, W5ZN, suggests being alert for E51 EME on 10 meters and on 50.313 MHz FT8. Following this operation, Bob will upload his log to Logbook of the World. Paper QSLs will be available in October through Clublog. And I do know that local ham WAGEX was able to work E51 EME from Southwest Ohio on 6 meters, so it can be done. German operators DL3RU Roman and DL2COM Leo are planning a, quote, microlight de-expedition to Liechtenstein, HB0, at the end of September and the beginning of October. They will be on CW only with an emphasis on JAVKZL on the higher bands. Roman and Leo will be operating from the Augustenberg summit at 2359 meters above sea level. Quote, this location has been carefully chosen to allow a good takeoff angle to the target area, said Roman. They will be running 50 to 100 watts on battery power with directional antennas. Because they will be dependent on good weather conditions, the exact dates will not be announced until very close to the operation. Koturu JP1IHD has adjusted the dates of his next trip to Ogasawara Islands, where he will operate as JD1BQP. Originally, it was October 22nd to November 9th, but now it's October 21st to November 3rd. He expects to be QRV on 1.8 through 50 MHz on sideband, FT4, and FT8. He will be especially active on the higher bands with a focus on 6 meters. He will be participating in the 2024 CQ Worldwide DX Sideband Contest. From the 31st of October till the 11th of November, the Mediterraneo DX Club will be on the air with another challenging DXpedition in Africa. An international team of 14 operators will operate from Burkina Faso as XT2MD. 5 stations will be on air 24/7, and any open bands will be focused on, especially the low bands, 6 meters and, quote, human modes, including RTTY. The expedition will also be active on EME this year, again, and for the first time on QO100. Due to the well-known political military situation, the entry into the country and the radio operations will be particularly critical and uncertain. Details on team members, locations, equipment, and more are available by visiting the DXpedition website. Here you can leave your request for bands and modes to the team on their survey page. In due time, you can also find a, quote, ad hoc propagation forecast from VOCAP and the log online. For those of you that wish to support us in this adventure, there is a place to leave a small contribution to the DXpedition via PayPal, which will help us to ensure you better service for this and future DXpeditions. So just check out the XT2MD website. For immediate release, September 3rd, 2024, 3 Delta 2 Yankee Rotuma Island update. Our shipment arrived in Fiji at about 0900 on September 3rd. The tracking devices attached to the shipment came online in Nada, Fiji. The 330 kilogram shipment left Atlanta by truck for LAX on August 24th and departed LAX on August 31st on Qantas Air Freight for Fiji via Auckland, New Zealand, and then Sydney, Australia. Shipment by air freight is expensive, shares Greg, W6IZT team leader. To minimize shipping costs, the team will be carrying 2 each K3s, 3 each KPA 500s, laptops, the Starlink terminal, and other gear is checked or carry-on baggage. Our equipment will be picked up from customs in Nadi and placed in storage by our agent in Fiji in preparation for the trip by boat to Rotuma. The boat runs between Suava, Fiji and Rotuma about once per month. Our shipment will be picked up in Rotuma by our on-island representative for storage at our operating location. The team is scheduled to arrive on November 15th. This DXpedition is a partnership with Youth on the Air, encouraging youth participation, and will feature 3 young operators who will be active on the island, while there will also be 60 or more hams operating remotely using W6IZT's next-gen ribs over Starlink. The DXpedition will be signing 3 Delta 2 Yankee, not 3 Delta 2 Zulu as previously planned. Fundraising efforts continue for the November DXpedition. Please consider supporting the 3 Delta 2 Yankee Rotuma DXpedition by visiting the website rotuma2024.com. We hope to see you on the bands. The op on the other end is likely to be a young ham experiencing the thrill of a DXpedition pileup for the first time. His QTH is in Georgetown, and the antennas a Moxon, Delta Loop, and Bazooka for CW, sideband, digital, and satellite are there as well. Aldair is a member of CQJF and the MACAE CWDX group. If you are someone who likes podcasts and or YouTube episodes, the DX Mentor has a discussion with Dave, AA6YQ, about his groundbreaking and free station control suite of software products, otherwise known as DX Lab. Check it out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next week, this is Bill, AJB saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to see you in the pileups.
Coming up next, This Week in Amateur Radio is presenting another chapter of A Century of Amateur Radio, hams, organizations, events, inventions, from the mind of Chris Cordella, W2PA, and his editing team. Each episode will bring a different aspect of early amateur radio history. Coming up right after station identification here on This Week in Amateur Radio.
You are listening to North America's premier news and information service for the amateur radio hobbyist. We are This Week in Amateur Radio.
Welcome to the 11th segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio, hams, organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. I want to express my appreciation to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his superb website in the preparation of these programs. So, enjoy this chapter of ham radio history. The Audion. Vacuum tubes revolutionized radio, changing it more than any other single invention. When first introduced, however, even the scientists and engineers working on them did not fully understand how they worked. One of the first tubes to appear in QST was the Audion by DeForest. Although it had been introduced back in 1905, it was expensive, and amateurs did not begin to use it until 7 years later, when 22-year-old Edwin Armstrong demonstrated its practical use as a regenerative detector. In the very first issue of QST, tucked in the back on page 22, a teaser stated that the next issue would be a wonder, containing, among other things, information on the newest technology, the Audion detector. So, in January 2016, Tuska published the lead article, The Oscillating Audion, about using a vacuum tube as a detector. For the technical on the valve, he referred the reader to Armstrong's writings where the principles of regenerative reception were presented in full. The idea, he explained, was to combine an incoming signal with the signal of an oscillation in the tube, producing an audible beat note. Interestingly, when he referred to frequency, he didn't use the phrase cycles per second, but simply a frequency of 100,000 per second. Lacking a fundamental understanding of why it did what it did, he took an experimenter's approach and advised operators to play around with the adjustments until they found the right settings to receive signals. He reported that signals from professional stations over 5,000 miles away had been received by an East Coast ham using the Audion. As hams began to experiment with the Audion, the QST editor asked for anyone experienced with it to send in details for publication. The March editorial claimed that 90% of amateurs did not know how to use it properly. As an expensive luxury, hams could not afford to be burning them out, as was the tendency. It was widely known, however, that the most effective stations were using Audion detectors. Some hams were even using them to receive continuous wave signals, considered a potentially important development in radio should it be shown to be practical, despite the DeForest Company disapproving the use of the Audion this way. Perhaps answering this call for help, the lead article in the same issue, March Radio Bulletin, was Practical Pointers on the Audion, written by A.B. Cole, electrical engineer and sales manager at the DeForest Radio Tell and Tell Company. It was the first authoritative paper about vacuum tube technology to appear in the magazine. Filling 4 full pages, complete with a picture of the author, the article was the longest yet to be published in QST. Cole devoted 4 full paragraphs to establishing his credibility as an authority, while yet a true member of the amateur radio community. His opening sentence stated that his purpose in writing was not to sell Audions, but to assist those who use the justly famous Audion to obtain the best results. Maybe he thought it necessary to write this because his sales title was in the byline, but he probably also intended to attract more buyers despite this disclaimer. He professed to want to set the record straight, asserting that much had been written in error about the Audion without authority of the patentees. Although he had been working professionally in the field, he considered himself an amateur radio pioneer, having been active since 1904, experienced with the Audion since 1908, and was firmly an amateur at heart, whereas he claimed many commercial radio types were known to look down on amateurs. He also admitted that despite extensive experience with audions, he did not know it all, unlike many less experienced authors, in his estimation, who nevertheless seemed able to write whole books on the subject. No two audion bulbs were exactly alike, he explained, implying a lack of control in the manufacturing process, and therefore it required careful circuit design and especially careful layout to get good results from them. According to Cole, this was one reason the company did not sell them separately from the complete detector. It's fair to assume that they also made more money on the detector than on the audion alone. Moreover, removing the audion from the detector, as many apparently did for experimentation, caused the guarantee to be immediately dissolved. He cited an example of an amateur who had installed one in his own cabinet, could not get it to work after substituting parts, blamed it on the audion, and sent it back. The company discovered it to be in perfect working order when used in the proper detector. There were two grades of audion, S and X. S was the regular grade, having passed a test of sensitivity to weak signals when compared with a standard, the most sensitive crystal detector available. X-grade bulbs were ones that exhibited significantly higher sensitivity than the standard. Between 1 and 10% of a production run might be designated X-grade. Cole claimed that this method of testing using a practical receiving situation was more meaningful than theoretical testing, which he oddly defined as inferring performance solely by measuring terminal characteristics. He also stated that the DeForest Company's chosen testing apparatus consisted of standard amateur equipment so as to not bias the results by using equipment specially designed for the audion. This appears to contradict his previous statement about the need for greater care in designing such circuits, but it may be that he simply meant standard properly designed amateur equipment. The four most common troubles with audions all stemmed from wiring batteries improperly or using batteries that were too depleted, wrote Mr. Cole. This is reminiscent of troubleshooting charts in manuals today that begin by asking if the unit is plugged in and the power is turned on, because many times it isn't. The fifth had to do with lack of sensitivity at long wavelengths above 1,500 meters, which was attributed to inefficiencies in the typical tuner, not the audion itself, of course. The batteries were designated as A, the grid supply, B, the plate or wing supply, and the reason why B+ is commonly used to mean plate voltage, and the lighting battery for the filament. It was sometimes necessary to reverse the polarity of the lighting battery to get the circuit to work, though no reason was given in the article. Perhaps no cause was known to Cole or the company. A tuner was properly operated by adjusting the voltages for maximum weak signal sensitivity while listening. The objective was to first obtain some zero-signal background sound, hiss, then back off on the filament to extend the audion's life while leaving it set at a critical point of maximum sensitivity. Some fallacies need correcting, he wrote. You cannot use a detector bulb to build an amplifier. They are entirely different functions. You cannot operate detectors in excess of their ratings in order to get more gain as an amplifier, or for other purposes. You'll just burn them out faster. Thus, after establishing his credentials as a true amateur, he proceeded to discourage experimenting, the very essence of amateur radio, at least as far as the audion was concerned. The article included a picture of a DeForest RJ6 receiving set. It had 4 controls, and the audion bulb was mounted on the front panel on the outside of the cabinet. As the center of attention, after all, it was the single active element. This mounting scheme permitted the operator to watch it glow and adjust the filament visually. Later in the same issue, a half-page ad from the wireless manufacturing company, DeForest Company, appeared for the first time. Big bold letters announced a new receiving set, a complete receiver based on the audion. It claimed to be the lowest-priced high-quality set ever offered for sale. A full-page ad by DeForest Radio, Telephone, and Telegraph Company of New York City also appears in the same issue. Their RJ8 model sold for $25 and the RJ9 model for $14, both without AB batteries not included. This was roughly $530 and $300 respectively in 2012. The main improvement was the replacement of the high-voltage step-switch selector with a potentiometer, an improvement called for in the previous month's article. 2 months later, Cole wrote a short follow-up article, an Audion Hint, in which he described how to make a high-value resistor with paper, pencil line, and rubber block to serve as a high-resistance leak between plate and grid to prevent temporary paralyzing of the Audion due to static discharge at the antenna. Picking up where Cole and Tuska had left off, Paul Godley of the RCA wrote the first in-depth article about circuit design, with the Audion being one of the first to explore its use on short wavelengths. Filling nearly 8 pages, Godley methodically presented receiving circuits of increasing complexity, ranging from the 1-tube simple regenerative detector up to a 4-tube receiver that employed 3 steps of audio amplification and interstage transformers, ignoring with gusto Cole's admonition against using the Audion for anything other than detection. Godley would later play an important role in the development of the short waves and equipment for using them. Included in this material are quotes from the following: C. Tuska, The Oscillating Audion, QST, January 1916, page 3. Editorial QST, March 1916, page 57. A.B. Cole, Practical Pointers on the Audion, QST, March 1916, page 41. P.F. Godley, Applications of the Audion, QST, August 1916, page 193. With thanks to W2PA Chris Cadella for allowing us the use of his website's materials, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions, I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. The other day I lamented to a fellow amateur that my shack was not functioning well. Specifically, my main workstation died 3 months ago, and ever since I've been struggling to reclaim my productivity. One aspect of that is my desk. For half a decade or so, I've had my computer clamped to a rolling lectern. It allowed me to move around my office as my mood and the light from the window changed. During the weekly net, I'd move my lectern and computer next to my radio and host the net, whilst logging on my computer. That's no longer possible because of a number of reasons, so instead I was trying to accomplish the same thing on a tiny 13-inch screen, which didn't work for me. My friend asked me why I hadn't just extended the microphone lead from my radio, so I could sit at my now stationary computer and still key the microphone. I located an Ethernet joiner, an Ethernet cable, and did just that. Simple. Job done. Then I started wondering why I wasn't on HF with my station, and if there was a simple solution that was eluding me. Spoiler alert, it still eludes me. The requirements are not too complicated. Well, at least in my mind they're not. I want to operate on HF. I want the computer to not be physically or specifically electrically connected to the radio in any way. I need to be able to use logging software that tracks the radio band, mode and frequency. I'd like to use digital modes. I'd like to have a computer-controlled voice keyer, and I do not want to run Windows. And if I can help it at all, I'd like to spend as little time as possible doing this without spending an arm and a leg. So then I started wondering what this looks like for other people. What kinds of compromises have you made in your shack? What have you accomplished, and how did you get there? What choices of hardware and software did you make, and why? Did you give up or face the challenge head on? How did you gather information, and how did you find out what others did? Not for a moment do I think that this is a simple thing to solve, but it's clear to me that I'm so far down the complicated rabbit hole that I'd like someone to show me the light at the end of the tunnel to make some progress. Of course, I've not been idle while all this is happening. I configured a Raspberry Pi, a small single-board computer, to talk to my radio via USB. I connected a sound card to the audio connector on my radio. Theoretically, this should give me all that I need. But the difference between theory and practice is common knowledge. In theory it works, in practice it doesn't. The Pi is a few years old, but it's not doing much at all. It connects to my network wirelessly, so my main computer isn't physically connected to the radio, but it's still pretty unreliable, and I have to say, calling CQ, either using voice or digital modes, should be rock solid. You don't want your radio to keep transmitting after it's supposed to, and other little issues like that. So, how did you do this? I'm interested to know. I'm not the first person to run into this issue, and I'm not the last. Your experience might help me, and it might help others. Drop me an email, cq@vk6flab.com, and I look forward to hearing about your adventures. The other day I took delivery of a shiny new circuit board, populated with components and connectors. Knowing me, you'd assume that I'd been the recipient of some kind of software-defined radio gadget, and you'd be right. One of the connectors was a micro USB socket, intended to be used to plug the hardware into a computer, and to drive the circuit board. The board came to me by way of a friend who saw it online, waxed lyrical about it, and for less than $35, who could begrudge this exploration into a new toy? Once it arrived, it sat on my shelf for a few weeks, enticingly packed in an anti-static bag, transparent enough to see the device inside, taunting me to open it up, plug it in, and have some fun. Today, I opened it up and started researching my new gadget. It didn't come with any user manual, no URL, no model number, but it did have a call sign on it, so I started there. I'll note that I'm not going to repeat that call sign here, for a number of reasons, which I'll get into. My exploration discovered a site where this device was being sold. It also unearthed several international amateur radio forums describing what appeared to be this device, including circuit diagrams and specifications. What I found harder to discover was software. It appears that I have a clone of a device that may still be manufactured, or not. I cannot tell. I found some example code on GitHub for the original hardware, but it seemed to require other libraries, but didn't actually specify those anywhere. I opened up an online translation tool and started translating some of the wording on the circuit board in an attempt to discover just what information was written on the board. The wording was clearly from a different culture, a different perspective, and while it claims to come from a makerspace that appears to promote women, it also contained a militaristic phrase which caused me to pause. In that moment I came to a sudden and abrupt realization. How do I know what this piece of hardware actually does? How do I know if when I plug it into the first available USB socket on my computer, it won't install anything nefarious, start connecting to the internet, and start doing something unexpected? There's enough hardware on the circuit board to do that, and even if the labels on the components tell me that they are a specific integrated circuit, how do I know that it is actually that chip? The chips on this circuit appear to have a lot more connectivity than a simple receiver might warrant. One has 40 pins, the other 32. If the label is accurate, the datasheet for one of the chips indicates that it includes an 8-bit microcontroller among its various functions. I'll admit that I'm coming from an IT security background at this, and you're free to argue that I'm being paranoid. But does that make me wrong? I know that I don't know enough about this particular board or its origins that for now it's going to remain inside its anti-static bag, taunting me with the possibilities of the connectors it offers. But until I know more about the provenance of this gadget, it's going nowhere near any of my computers. If you have suggestions on how to proceed, don't be shy. I did briefly consider plugging it into a Pi, but how would I know if it updated the firmware, forever compromising that Pi? Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that this board does any of this. My point is around discovering if it does or not, one way or another. No doubt, some might think I'm overly suspicious, and there's truth in that. But in my profession it pays to be vigilant. The underlying issue is that of validation. There's antivirus software available to deal with malicious code, but how do you do such a thing for malicious hardware? Again, I'm not saying that this circuit board is doing anything other than being a USB-connected receiver, but how would you know? How would you verify that? And how do we in the amateur community weed out the nefarious tools from the legitimate ones? I'll leave you with one thought. When was the last time you plugged your phone into a free charger on the bus or at the airport? How do you know that your phone wasn't hacked? I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima, Alpha Bravo.
German astronomer Johannes Kepler made sketches of sunspots in 1607 from his observations of the sun's surface, and centuries later, the pioneering drawings are helping scientists solve a solar mystery. Astronomers observed sunspots with telescopes for the first time in 1610, 3 years after Kepler's drawings and Kepler's long disregarded sketches, overlooked because their drawings, rather than telescopic observations, could provide crucial historical insights. Kepler used a camera obscura, which utilized a small hole in the wall of the instrument to project the sun's image on a sheet of paper and sketch the features he observed. Kepler mistakenly believed he had captured Mercury moving in orbit across the sun in May 1607, but he later retracted his report 11 years later and determined he had in fact observed a sunspot group. Now a research team has determined that the sunspot group observed by Kepler belonged to the tail end of solar cycle minus 14.
Proud to be among the very first podcasts on the Internet, you are listening to the weekly amateur radio news and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio. ARRL previously reported that we are responding to a serious incident involving access to our network and headquarters-based systems. Several services have been affected, including those administered by the ARRL Volunteer Examiner Coordinator. Exam registrations and materials. ARRL Volunteer Examiners should continue to submit exam registrations and material requests. We are able to post new or revised exam session dates and details to the website, and we continue to ship out exam materials. Please remember that most exam materials are available on the League website. Processing applications to the FCC. We are processing amateur radio license applications to the FCC. This includes applications for new and upgrade licenses, individual applications, and club license applications. The VEC exam session upload webpage was not affected by the incident. The VE session counts webpage data entry programming has been unavailable since May 12th. This will be updated with the new data as soon as we are able. VE accreditations, international radio permits, and license class certificates. We are unable to create volunteer examiner badges, certificates, and stickers. New ARRL VE applications and renewals are unable to be processed at this time. International amateur radio permits and license class certificates are being created and shipped. 2024 through 2028 extra class exam booklets. A previous version of the story indicated that the ARRL VEC will supply its officially appointed, field-stocked VE team leaders with the new extra class exam booklet designs around mid-June. Due to ARRL's recent system disruption, the shipment was delayed. The exam booklets were shipped out July 8th and should have been delivered before August 1st. VE teams may contact the ARRL VEC to receive instructions on how to print new extra exams in the interim. The newly revised pool must be used for extra class license exams starting July 1st, 2024. Exam designs based off the previous pool are no longer valid. The outdated versions of the extra exams should be destroyed or thrown away to avoid a mix-up at the testing session. ARRL Youth Licensing Grant Program and FCC Application Fee Reimbursement Information. ARRL is continuing to accept reimbursement forms to cover the one-time $35 application fee for new licensed candidates younger than 18 years of age for tests administered under the auspices of the ARRL VEC. Reimbursement checks may take longer than normal to be processed at this time. We appreciate your patience as ARRL continues to work on restoring access to affected systems and services.
A few days ago, NASA astronaut Butch Wilmore noticed some strange noises emanating from a speaker inside the Starliner spacecraft docked to the ISS. I've got a question about Starliner. Wilmore radioed down to Mission Control at Johnson Space Center in Houston. There's a strange noise coming through the speaker. I don't know what's making it. Wilmore said he was not sure if there was some oddity in the connection between the station and the spacecraft causing the noise or something else. He asked the flight controllers in Houston to see if they could listen to the audio inside the spacecraft.
Houston on 2, got a question about Starliner.
Houston's with you, Butch. Go ahead.
There's a strange noise coming through the speaker, and I didn't know if you could connect into the Starliner and let me keep mic and let you hear it. I don't know what's making it, but I don't know if it's something that maybe is connected between here and there, making that happen. But anyway, can you do that?
We can configure that, Butch. Give us a minute, and I'll call you back when it's ready.
Okay.
Station Houston on 2, we're configured for audio via hardline and CST, if you want to give us a call.
Okay, I'm in Starliner, and how do you read?
5x5, how many?
Yes, ma'am. Okay, I'm gonna keep the mic up next to the speaker.
Copy. All right, Butch, that one came through. It was kind of like a pulsing noise, almost like a sonar ping.
Yeah, I'll do it one more time, and I'll let y'all scratch your heads and see if you can figure out what's going on. Here we go. All right, over to you. Tell us if you figure it out.
Yep, good recording. Thanks, Butch. We will pass it on to the team and let you know what we find. And Butch, just to make sure I'm on the same page, this is emanating from the speaker in Starliner. You don't notice anything else, any other noises, any other weird configs in there?
A recording of this audio and Wilmore's conversation with Mission Control was captured and shared by a Michigan-based meteorologist named Bob Dale. It was not immediately clear what was causing the odd and somewhat eerie noise. As Starliner flies to the space station, it maintains communications with the space station via radio frequency system. Once docked, however, there is a hardline umbilical that carries audio. Astronauts notice such oddities in space from time to time. For example, during China's first human spaceflight in 2003, astronaut Lang Lui said he heard what sounded like an iron bucket being knocked by a wooden hammer while in orbit. Later, scientists realized the noise was due to small deformations in the spacecraft due to the difference in pressure between its inner and outer walls. This weekend's sonar-like noise most likely have a benign cause, and Wilmore certainly did not sound frazzled. But the odd noises are worth noting given the challenges that Boeing and NASA have had with the debut crewed flight of the Starliner, including substantial helium leaks in flight and failing thrusters. NASA announced a week ago that due to uncertainty about the flyability of Starliner, it would come home without its original crew of Wilmore and Suni Williams. Starliner is now due to fly back autonomously to Earth on Friday, September 6th. Wilmore and Williams will return to Earth next February, flying aboard a Crew Dragon spacecraft scheduled to launch with just 2 astronauts later this month.
It is time for this week's edition of AMSAT Satellite Shorts from all over. We start this week with the news that NASA will return Boeing's Starliner to Earth without astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams, KD-5 PLB, aboard the spacecraft the agency announced last week. The uncrewed return allows NASA and Boeing to continue gathering testing data on Starliner during its upcoming flight home, while also not accepting more risk than necessary for its crew. Wilmore and Williams, who flew to the International Space Station in June aboard NASA's Boeing crew flight test, have been busy supporting station research, maintenance, and Starliner system testing and data analysis, among other activities. They will continue their work formally as part of the Expedition 71 and 72 crew through February 2025 and will fly home aboard a Dragon spacecraft with 2 other crew members assigned to the agency's SpaceX Crew 9 mission. Starliner is expected to depart from the space station and make a safe, controlled, autonomous re-entry and landing in early September. Next comes more news from NASA announcing that astronaut Nick Hague, KG-5 and Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov will launch no earlier than Tuesday, September 24th on the agency's SpaceX Crew 9 mission to the International Space Station. NASA astronauts Zena Cardman, KG-5CMN, and Stephanie Wilson, KD-5DZE, previously announced as crewmates, are eligible for reassignment on a future mission. The updated crew complement follows NASA's decision to return the agency's Boeing crew flight test uncrewed and launch Crew 9 with 2 unoccupied seats. And our final satellite short comes from the U.S. National Science Foundation, National Radio Astronomy Observatory, and its administrator, Associated Universities Incorporated, have created Supernova, an online educational platform that provides inclusive, equitable access to radio technology learning and training. Thanks to a generous grant from Amateur Radio Digital Communications, learners can now enroll in 2 self-paced courses to learn the fundamentals of radio communications. The Technician Amateur Radio License and EMS course introduces learners to the electromagnetic spectrum using amateur radio as a vehicle.
We pause for stations along the network to identify. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, available as a direct download on our website at www.twiar.net.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. There were 7 CubeSats deployed from the ISS on August 29th. 6 of them have IARU, Amateur Satellite Frequency Coordination. 3 of them carry APRS digipeaters on the APRS frequency of 145.825 MHz. Cosmogirl Sat uses the call sign JS1YOI and operates on the APRS frequency. It also has UHF store and forward on 437.120 MHz using GMSK4K8. You guessed it, the satellite was built by the Cosmo Girls Amateur Radio Club, which are all Japanese women. Sagan Sato also operates on the APRS frequency. It carries an infrared camera and a gamma ray detector. The UHF frequency is 437.050 MHz using GMSK4K8 as well as CW. Sakura is another satellite on the APRS frequency. Like the first 2, it has UHF on 437.375 MHz, GMSK4K8, and will monitor sunspots and solar flares. The final 3 satellites with amateur radio frequency coordination are Binar 2, Binar 3, and Binar 4. They operate on 437.700 MHz, 437.850 MHz, and 437.925 MHz respectively. The satellites all have CW OQPSK 100/38.4 kbps and GFSK 19.2, 9.6, and 1.2 kilobits. The satellites are going to test radiation shielding materials. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time once again for this week's propagation forecast, brought to us each week by our solar prognosticator Tad Cook, K7RA, in Seattle, Washington. 8 new sunspot groups emerged over the past week. 2 appeared on August 30th, 3 more on August 31st, another 2 on September 2nd, and 1 more on September 4th. The average daily sunspot number declined from 177.1 to 155.3, while average daily solar flux barely changed from 229 to 230.3. Looking at the predicted solar flux for the near term, it will be 250 on September 8th, 255 on September 9th and 10th, 245 on September 11th and 12th, then 240, 250, 255, and 245 on September 13th through the 16th. The predicted planetary A index for the near term will be 10 on September 8th and 9th, 8 on September 10th and 11th, and hold steady at 5 on September 12th through the 16th.
In Radio Sport this week, more great contest on September 5th and the 6th. Walk for the Bacon QRP contest. That's CW. September 5th, the NRAU 10-meter activity contest, CW phone and digital. September 7th and 8th, the All Asian DX contest. That's phone. September 7th, Wake Up QRP Sprint, CW. September 7th and 8th, the SARL VHF UHF FM contest. That's phone. The SARL Field Day contest, CW phone and digital. That's also September 7th and 8th. And the IARU Region 1 Field Day, single sideband is phone. And the RSGP SSB Field Day, that's phone, all on September 7th through the 8th. Then on September 7th, the Ohio State Parks on the Air, that's phone. And on September 7th and 8th again, the IARU Region 1 145 megahertz contest, CW phone and digital. And remember, you can visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions on September 8th, the ARRL Southern New Jersey Section Convention. That's in Mullica Hill, New Jersey. September 20th through the 22nd, the Duke City Hamfest, sponsoring the ARRL New Mexico State Convention in Albuquerque, New Mexico. September 21st through the 22nd, the Midwest Superfest, sponsoring the ARRL Illinois Section Convention in Chillicothe, Illinois. And on September 28th, the Red River Radio Amateurs Hamfest, sponsoring the ARRL Dakota Division Convention. That's in West Fargo, North Dakota. Pacificon, hosting the 2024 ARRL Pacific Division Convention, will be held on October 18th through the 20th at the San Ramon Marriott in San Ramon, California. The three-day event, sponsored by the Mount Diablo Amateur Radio Club, features a full slate of forum presentations on a wide range of amateur radio topics. ARRL National Instructor Gordon West, WB6NOA, will be on hand as well. There will be an opportunity also to hear about and discuss important national amateur radio issues with ARRL officials and staff. For more information, visit the Pacificon website at Pacificon 2024.
According to the headlines in the Times of India, they called a missing man whose family thought he had been dead for a decade. But the former mathematics teacher, said to be affected by mental illness, has been returned home to his family and other family members with the help of a network of amateur radio operators. Reports in the Times of India and the Deccan Herald said that area residents near the border of India and Bangladesh noticed a man standing by a large patch of wet soil, writing and solving mathematical problems there with a large stick. They told the newspapers that he seemed otherwise disoriented, which stirred their concern. The police were contacted and, wanting to expand the search for family beyond the immediate area, authorities reached out to the West Bengal Radio Club, which is known for its success in missing persons cases because of its connections among radio operators in India. Ambarish Nagbiswa, VU2 JFA, the secretary of the radio club, told Newsline in a text message that he and club member Parimal Roy, VU3 ZIM, were able to circulate photos of the man to clubs in the region. Ultimately, authorities were contacted by the man's father. According to the newspaper accounts, the man, who is now in his 40s, apparently developed mental problems more than a decade ago and disappeared, leading his family to believe they would not see him alive again.
Federal Communications Commission Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel signed a Memorandum of Understanding with Privacy Commissioner of Canada, Philippe Dufresne, to strengthen information sharing and enforcement cooperation between the two regulators. The agreement establishes the parameters for the two regulators to exchange information in order to enforce compliance with laws in both countries and to share knowledge and expertise on regulatory policies and technical efforts related to applicable law. The Federal Communications Commission is responsible for implementing and enforcing America's communications laws and regulations. The Privacy Commissioner of Canada oversees compliance with Canada's two federal privacy laws that set out the rules for how federal government institutions and certain businesses must handle personal information.
The Amateur Radio Emergency Service, or ARES, is being brought into alignment with many of the agencies it serves by adopting the National Incident Management System's Incident Command System. This is an initiative of the ARRL to update the training of ARES members to better meet the needs of its partners. A statement by the ARRL reads, "This is a first step towards our long-term goal of being recognized by our served partner agencies as the gold standard of volunteer communication support based upon ARES members' unique experience and capabilities." The training has several levels of specialization areas to provide amateurs with a consistent track to advance their skills as well as their understanding of emergency communication practices. The incident command system is used throughout government and non-governmental organizations, as well as the private sector, to manage efficient deployment of assistance and cooperation at incidents such as severe weather or natural disasters.
As the summer camp wraps up in the Northern Hemisphere, so too does the Youngsters on the Air camp that took place in the Czech Republic. Campers finished their week of immersion in amateur radio and friendship at the Youngsters on the Air camp on Friday, August 23rd. Now all that's left to remember is the experience and to share it. Rise Williams, M0WGY, and AJ6XD, who represented the Republic Society of Great Britain at the camp, wrote a daily blog that recounts such daily activities as kit building, balloon launching, and operation of the special call sign OL24YOTA. If you weren't one of the campers, you can read the blog and experience that memorable week vicariously in words and pictures. The camp was organized by the Czech Radio Club and the Youth Working Group of the International Amateur Radio Union, Region 1.
You are listening to This Week in Amateur Radio, available to download as a podcast from anywhere on the web podcasts are available.
This past winter, Amateur Radio Digital Communications announced that Pat Nelson, KE0QXD, had recently joined their Conduct Review Committee. Familiar with her tireless spirit, they were looking forward to working with her. That partnership never happened as Pat died suddenly a few days later on January 29th. The contributions she could have made would have been the latest in amateur radio tenure, marked by creativity and a capacity for giving and volunteering. In Minneapolis and St. Paul, Pat had a long association with KFAI Radio, a community broadcast station, as a host and volunteer. A certified specialist in IT, she also assisted with programming and ran a company, Nelson Works, LLC, which provided computer training and support. When she joined the station, she became friends with Mike Stapp, KE0WW, a longtime ham who introduced her to amateur radio. For Pat, that marked yet another beginning. She became licensed in 2018, and her commitment grew over the years. In 2022, she produced and hosted a special program on KFAI in honor of International Women's Day, focusing on women active in amateur radio. Pat also became a volunteer examiner at the Aurora Amateur Radio Group and served on its VE Advisory Board. She was a lifetime member of the OMIK Amateur Radio Association, an international group founded in 1952 by black radio amateurs, and she had previously served the association as secretary. In January 2023, Pat became the first guest speaker at the National Radio Astronomy Observatory's ham radio project in Virginia, led by Jesse Alexander, WB2IFS. Supported by the ARDC, the project familiarizes students with amateur radio and the electromagnetic spectrum. Pat was 68.
Laurel Tincher, program manager of the Terre Haute Children's Museum, called QRZ in a manner of speaking, and the Wabash Valley Amateur Radio Association answered that call. She invited the club to present a day of ham-related activities to showcase the kinds of things amateur radio can do. According to club president Kevin Berlin, K9HX, 100 or so visitors got the opportunity on Saturday, August 24th. They participated in a radio-related scavenger hunt and enjoyed activities that taught them a little more about Morse code. As the hams made QSOs on SSB using a remote-controlled HF station, the youngsters got a better understanding of what HF propagation can do. The visitors didn't just take away a better standing of amateur radio. One lucky youngster won the random drawing for a small STEM robotics kit. According to Kevin, quite a few of them expressed an interest in working toward getting their license.
There are more than 2,000 mostly intact dead rockets circling the Earth, but until this year, no one ever launched a satellite to go see what one looked like after many years of tumbling around the planet. The U.S. Space Command said in December that the population of space debris in orbit has increased by 76% since 2019 to 44,600 objects. The uptick in space junk is primarily due to debris-generating events such as anti-satellite tests or occasional explosions. The number of active satellites has also increased to more than 7,000, driven by launches of mega-constellations like SpaceX's Starlink Internet network. In February, a Japanese company named Astroscale sent a small satellite into low Earth orbit on top of a Rocket Lab launcher. A couple of months later, Astroscale's ADRIS-J, or Active Debris Removal by Astroscale Japan, spacecraft, completed its pursuit of a Japanese rocket stuck in orbit for more than 15 years. ADRIS-J photographed the upper stage of an HIIA rocket from a range of several hundred meters and then backed away. This was the first publicly released image of space debris captured from another spacecraft using rendezvous and proximity operations. Since then, Astroscale has pulled off more complex maneuvers around the HIIA upper stage, which hasn't been controlled since it deployed a Japanese climate research satellite in January 2009. Astroscale attempted to complete a 360-degree fly-around of the HIIA rocket last month, but the spacecraft triggered an autonomous abort one-third through the maneuver after detecting an attitude anomaly. ADRIS-J is the first mission to approach a piece of space debris, which comes with more challenges. The HIIA upper stage lacks laser reflectors and targeting aids that would help an approaching spacecraft navigate its way closer. A few years ago, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency cinched a public-private partnership with Astroscale to demonstrate technologies the private sector could use to remove large pieces of space debris littering low Earth orbit. The same robotic technologies could also apply to satellite servicing or refueling missions. With more financial assistance from JAXA, Astroscale is developing a follow-on mission called ADRIS-J2 to dock with the same HIIA rocket visited by the ongoing mission, then steer it on a trajectory to re-enter the atmosphere. Astroscale hopes a successful demonstration of this capability on the ADRIS-J2 mission will lead to more contracts from commercial or government operators to remote large pieces of space junk from orbit. An HIIA upper stage similar to the one visited by Astroscale's demo mission broke apart in 2019, creating more than 70 new debris fragments in low Earth orbit. A predicted close flyby by one of the pieces from the HIIA upper stage prompted the International Space Station to fire its engines to move out of its path in 2020.
Halibut Electronics has announced the release of its latest product, the EggNOGS kit, designed to facilitate the construction of egg beater antennas. This kit is aimed at amateur radio enthusiasts and satellite operators who wish to enhance their communication capabilities, particularly with the SatNOGS network. The EggNOGS kit is engineered to address the complexity of building egg beater antennas, which are known for their use in satellite communications. The kit includes a range of specialized components that are not typically available at local hardware stores. These components feature a band-specific phasing board that creates a 90-degree phase shift, a critical element in the construction of effective quadrature-fed antennas. Currently, the EggNOGS kit supports several frequency bands, 137.5, 145.9, 388.0, 401.0, and 436.5 MHz. The EggNOGS kit is designed to be versatile, compatible with various types of quadrature-fed antennas beyond just egg beaters. It can be used with turnstiles, helicals, and other balanced VHF and UHF antennas. Additionally, it works with any radio system, including low-power transmitters, making it a flexible option for a range of communication needs. The kit includes essential parts such as circuit boards for signal routing and phasing, a common mode current choke, and stainless steel mounting hardware. Builders will need to source additional materials, such as a section of PVC pipe and materials for the aerial loops and ground plane from local hardware stores. The default feed point connector is SMA, but there is an option to upgrade to BNC or Type F connectors. The EggNOGS kit is capable of handling moderate transmit powers, with the upper limit still being determined but expected to range between 15 watts and 50 watts. The kit is confirmed to handle up to 10 watts. Halibut Electronics invites feedback from users who may need phasing boards for additional frequencies not currently offered, with the possibility of expanding the product line based on customer demand.
Tom Kelly, AB6Z of the Pearl River Emergency Amateur Radio League in Mississippi, was recognized at the top of the Picayune City Council agenda for his contribution to emergency services in the county. The retired Homeland Security professional, who has more than 4 decades in law enforcement, deploys communications assistance when it's needed by the fire and police chiefs. Tom described the League's plans and goals and explained the type of training involved for League members who learn to dispatch and manage radio operators, deliver messages via radio, and read radar screens. Tom said the League is hoping to assist even more members in qualifying for their amateur radio license.
This week, a release surfaced about a new transistor in development inside a Massachusetts laboratory that is said to be extremely tough and resilient and offers super-fast switching while meeting or even exceeding industry standards. Researchers at MIT first announced the transistor's development in 2021 when they published the results of their study, which explored the use of an ultra-thin ferroelectric material made from boron nitride. At that time, the report was carried in the journal Science. Researchers wrote only of the possibilities. Now it is a reality. Working inside the laboratory, the scientists created that faster, more energy-efficient transistor, and they claim that even after 100 billion switches, there are no signs of degradation. Researchers told Popular Mechanics magazine that, for electronic devices such as computers, this eliminates the need for selective storage on a chip. Scientists also say that boron nitride has another advantage. It remains stable over long periods of time because its polarization can be reversed when there is an electric field. The next reality, actually manufacturing it, could be a lot tougher. Scientists acknowledged that despite the great gains in this development, they still don't have a way to mass produce it.
You're listening to North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine of the air. We are This Week in Amateur Radio, distributed worldwide at twiar.net.
The private astronaut mission Polaris Dawn is planned to launch aboard a Crew Dragon spacecraft on September 1st at 3:38 a.m. EDT from pad LC-39A at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The mission has a groundbreaking objective, the first commercial spacewalk. The 4-member crew, consisting of Anna Menon, Scott Poteet, Jared Isaacman, and Sarah Gillis, arrived at the Kennedy Space Center on August 19th to finalize preparations. This mission, the first of the Polaris program, marks a significant step in commercial space exploration and launch aboard a SpaceX Crew Dragon atop a Falcon 9 rocket. Scheduled to last 5 days, the Polaris Dawn mission will propel the Crew Dragon spacecraft to altitudes reaching 1,400 kilometers, the highest for a crewed mission since Apollo 17 in 1972. The mission's objectives are multifaceted, including testing laser intersatellite links with SpaceX Starlink satellites and conducting 40 experiments. However, the highlight will be the spacewalk, a historic first for a private mission and the first from a Crew Dragon spacecraft. The spacewalk will involve all 4 astronauts, with 2 emerging from the hatch in new SpaceX-developed extravehicular activity suits for a brief yet pivotal 2-hour spacewalk. Jared Isaacman, the billionaire backing the Polaris program and commander of Polaris Dawn, emphasized the importance of the spacewalk during a press conference after arriving at KSC. The idea is to learn as much as we possibly can about this suit and get it back to the engineers to inform future suit design evolutions, Isaacman stated. The spacewalk is scheduled for Flight Day 3, with preparations beginning shortly after launch. The crew will undergo a pre-breathing protocol to adjust the cabin's atmospheric pressure and increase oxygen levels a process essential for the EVA. SpaceX engineer Sarah Gillis, serving as a mission specialist, detailed the crew's rigorous preparations. On Flight Day 2, the astronauts will don the EVA suits for mobility tests inside the spacecraft. During the spacewalk, 2 astronauts, referred to as EV1 and EV2, will take turns exiting the spacecraft for approximately 15 to 20 minutes each. Isaacman noted that while the idea of a free-floating spacewalk was considered, the crew will instead perform a hands-free demonstration with their feet securely attached to the spacecraft's mobility aids, underscoring the mission's cautious approach. The mission's development has been intensely focused on the spacewalk and the associated EVA suits. The EVA probably makes up the majority of the development for Polaris Dawn, Isaacman said, acknowledging the inherent risks. SpaceX Vice President Bill Gerstenmaier, formerly of NASA, confirmed that extensive safety protocols have been implemented. He mentioned a recent issue where engineers identified and resolved a static electric discharge risk, ensuring the crew's safety during the spacewalk. Polaris Dawn's mission will conclude with a demonstration of Starlink capabilities on Flight Day 4, followed by re-entry on Day 6. As the first of 3 planned missions under the Polaris program, Polaris Dawn represents a significant leap forward in commercial spaceflight, setting the stage for future endeavors, including a potential crewed Starship launch.
And finally this week, to wrap up our news, do you know Morse code already? Or are you maybe trying to learn so you can be an old school ham? Either way, you could have a lot of fun with this great little entry into the 2024 Tiny Games Contest. It's called Morse Quest. This minimalist text-based adventure game is played entirely in Morse code. That is, the storyline, all the clues, and the challenges along the way are presented by a blinking LED. In turn, commands like look, take, and inventory are entered with the slim key on the lower right side. A small potentiometer allows the player to adjust the blink rate of the LED, so it's fun for all experience levels. The brains of this operation is an Arduino Nano, and there's really not much more to the BOM than that. It runs on a 9-volt battery, so theoretically it could be taken anywhere you want to escape reality for a little while.
This Week in Amateur Radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon. This Week in Amateur Radio is heard around the world on amateur radio repeater systems, streaming on the internet, or on great low-power FM broadcast stations like WGXC-FM, part of the Wave Farm on 90.7 MHz in Akron, New York, serving Greene County and the southern regions of New York's Capital District. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth for Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.